Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you are watching or listening to this, and welcome to Link Up Leaders, your direct link to leaders in supply chain and e-commerce. My name is Lisa. I'm your producer and co-host, and joined as always by Francois Jeffrey. Francois, how are you today?
I'm great. How are you doing, Lisa?
Doing well. I need to head off this episode with a preemptive apology for any background noise on my side. They are pressure washing the warehouse floor, and it sounds like it's going to come through the walls. So it is noisy in the office.
Well, I can't hear
today.
anything.
Not yet. They've quieted down for the moment. We'll see what happens. You know, usually right when we get to the meat of the conversation, everything. It sounds like they just dropped a shelf. Yeah. So I don't know if you guys can hear that, but apologies if you can. All right. Well, happy Friday, everybody. It is Friday, right? I woke up yesterday thinking it was Friday.
They just ratified Juneteenth tomorrow being a federal holiday.
Is that what that was about?
That's what that was about.
I saw Usher actually post a picture with Vice President Harris, and he was just like, I don't remember what it said about Juneteenth. I ignorantly thought that it was already a holiday.
Well, I think there was a petition for it to become a holiday, but it was ratified, if that's the right word. I don't even know. Ratified yesterday afternoon is when they actually signed it in.
Gotcha.
So,
okay. Well, very exciting news then. All good things happening. And today, another very good thing happening. We are speaking with Neil Twa so that we can learn how to think like a seven-figure seller. So Neil, good morning and welcome to the show.
Good morning. How are you guys doing today?
We are doing well, dear.
Great.
And where are you calling in from? I can't remember.
I am in Southwest Missouri. We live on about 40 acres in the country. So as you are disclaiming your noise, I will tell you if you hear cats, dogs, or possibly gunshots, it's because I live in the country. So don't freak out. That's happened on live calls before. So
that's awesome. I'm a redneck in my spare time. So
a redneck, part-time redneck here checking in. Yeah, no, I'm a full-time redneck. There's different levels of redneckiness. So I'm like your faux redneck. I've been out in the country for 8 years, although I wasn't raised or born here. And my wife was a country girl and said, hey, let's get some country. And I'm like, what? She says, we want to get 20 acres. And I'm like, what in the heck do I do with 20 acres? How am I going to find it? We live on 40 acres, as it turns out, which is actually not enough land. Now that I've lived here long enough, I'm like, I want more land.
40 acres not enough.
It feels weird because when you drive or you go out in the UTVs and stuff and you get out in the 4x4s and stuff, it seems to end quickly at times. It sounds really weird. And you're like, hey, I want to keep going, but there's no more other land. I'm like, I should probably get more land.
Yeah. Have y'all got animals and stuff?
We got all kinds of animals. I have 4 daughters. The oldest is going to turn 13 here in about 4 or 5 days. Roughly. We've got ducks, chickens, that we raise out here. There's outside cats. We've got 3 dogs. We've had goats, but they're not really good for young children because they tend to like to buck the young ones. But we live next to a couple of large farms, 400, 600 acres. They're actually ranches. They've got cattle out there. And anytime we want to get beef, it's like, hey, that guy looks delicious. Let's have him process. And we take him down and have him I know it sounds really weird to people who are listening to this, but it's literally off the hoof, grass-finished beef. And it's the most amazing stuff you can get.
I'm sure.
Where we live.
I used to live on a farm, actually, when I was a kid.
How big was it? Because these sound huge.
It was, I think, close to 100 acres. We had a bunch of goats. We would go out every morning, 5 a.m., milk the goats, which was a process in and of itself.
Right.
But yeah, we had goats, chickens. We had some horses at one point. We had some cows. Or horses? I don't know. Okay. But we had a bunch of different animals. It was amazing. It was probably the most, because I would go between the city in Arlington, Virginia, and Shenandoah, Virginia. And Shenandoah is just the most peaceful, like, great place. You just go outside. You don't have to think about anything. You don't have to worry about neighbors.
Yep.
So I'm jealous.
Yeah, that's what I love about being out here. It's so quiet in the morning. We can sit on the deck and have coffee and just enjoy the beauty of it. We don't have anything to milk here unless you consider cats, but I've heard that's not advisable. So we don't do that stuff. out where we are. So nothing to milk where we are at the moment.
Sounds like a dangerous pastime. We'll get to e-com in a second, I swear. But I do have to ask your the processors up there. How did they fare during COVID? Because a lot of the processors that like my friends take there, because deer are huge down here. So the processors you would take your deer to, a lot of them closed down after COVID, and the ones they would usually go to aren't in business anymore. How did they fare up there?
We did just fine. The mandates and situation where we live was very kind of nothing burger. And so for the most part, there was not a real big speed bump where I live.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay.
Most things stayed pretty the same, some growth, a few changes, but nothing really significant.
Okay. Mostly insulated from it.
Mostly insulated.
Gotcha.
That's great to hear.
Yeah. Well, other than living on a farm and having 4 daughters, tell us.
We homeschool, by the way, too. We've homeschooled for the last 8 years, which is fun. That's us personally, kind of in a nutshell. We love to have our family here, our community. I've been involved in my kids' lives since day one. I couldn't imagine doing it any differently. We focused on e-com in 2011 and more of a specific focus around the Amazon channel. Although I had experience in e-com prior to that, I was doing a lot of affiliate marketing and lead generation for e-com related companies. I got really good at it and got some companies Series A funding because of it, and really learned how to develop e-com brands in online marketing, which is what led me to start developing my own brands. But prior to that, I had a whole nother life in the oil and gas fields of Oklahoma. I was in the section that was doing technologies and development, and we were patenting new technologies for the oil and gas field, which was fun. And spent about 15 years in that, which was a bounce off of my career at IBM. I left in 2007 to start my own series of management consulting gigs, and eventually made IBM a client, got involved with Boeing and a number of other agencies where we did help deliver the census project in 2010 and worked on a lot of security clearance stuff and had a lot of fun in that business, but recognized that that's not really what I wanted to do with life. I wanted more of the lifestyle business, which is part of the reason why I set off from IBM to do my own thing, because I was already laptop and cell phone, and I was traveling. Like the last year I left, I was 300 days. Airplanes were like, catching a bus. It just got to be absolutely ridiculous, and knew I couldn't sustain a family and do that. So I looked for alternatives, and that's why I got out and started my own series of companies, and have eventually gotten very focused on e-com with the Amazon space and brand building. And that's what I've been focused on for the last 8 years now. Is really building strong brands off of the e-com marketplace that is Amazon, but it is a testing ground. We like to call it kind of an incubator, because if you prove it on Amazon and you can make it successful in brand orientation, it goes wide. You take that out to the mass market and it's already easily adopted. So we love that because it's a really big testing ground for brands and products.
There you go. And have you been an Amazon seller yourself? I
have. It's how I started. Yeah, I started flipping products in 2011 just to see what I could get to stick. With my technical background and that lead generation combo thing, I realized at that point, Amazon was a big search engine for products. And while people were looking for information on Google, they were actually wanting to buy something. And Amazon's whole thing was, let's sell everything to all people in 30 seconds or less. And I really kind of jived with that. And at that point, it was just a 2-lane highway, right? Now we would refer to it as like a 7-lane highway, right? So we just started throwing things. We buy small stuff. We did arbitrage, right? To see what would work. And part of that was just to figure out how the engine was, looking at us as products and how it was competing in competition and how we would rank them and how we would create better products or stuff. So we started to play with it. And I suddenly realized, my IBM days kicked in because I was building latent semantic search engines at IBM. I was in the knowledge management side. I was working on part of the Watson computer with some very, very super smart people in Armonk. And I was remembering the stuff they were teaching and we were learning. And I was like, oh man, this is what this engine is doing. And so I spent the better part of two years just playing with Amazon's engine, its little filing system, this search thing. It's called the A9 engine. And I'm like, there's got to be a way that it's going to respond and talk. And just like we were programming it, how does it want to learn? And all I realized was, there's a numerical dance that it does to see whether or not you're a better product or brand than the other ones that are currently selling. And once we started to figure out that pattern of dance, we just started giving the engine what it wanted and it started rewarding us. And so in 2014, we started building brands instead of flipping products. And all of a sudden the game changed. We just launched brand after brand after brand. We have done a collective $100 million in sales since then through our agencies and through our own personal brands. We run 8 different companies now ourselves, taught over 1,000 people how to do it, made over 25 millionaires. And are still building companies in 7 and 8 figures on the brands now within Amazon. So it's been a really fun ride. Now we're moving into acquisition with Voltage Portfolios, which literally just signed MOUs this week, which I'll be putting press releases out. And by the time this maybe comes to air, this will already be public knowledge. But we're very excited to be purchasing our first companies. We have a goal of getting the first 4 brands purchased in the next 90 days. And then we'll be purchasing 3 to 4 companies a quarter for a total of around 36 of them in the next 3 years.
Wow.
So we're often doing right now. Yeah. Brand acquisition.
What size companies?
Anywhere between 3 to 5 million typically is what we're shooting for. If they are $1 million to $2 million, we're usually looking at their return, their EBITDA, how much profit they actually have in the business. If it's well above 20%, we'll consider those. We're looking for brands that are somewhat established on Amazon, but have not fully seen their growth for the 3 reasons most Amazon companies don't see continued growth. It's typically a capitalization problem, an understanding of the systems, and the management structure it takes to really make them grow and grow rapidly. And of course, what you need to do to build a brand that Amazon actually wants you to build and therefore rewards you and then helps you with the marketing. There's just kind of, it sounds obvious when I say it out loud, but you'd be surprised at how many sellers aren't actually doing that in the system and losing out on a lot of opportunity. So we're growing those, and then we're going to move them into the major markets through radio, television, infomercials, mass traffic, mass media, with the Harrington Group out of Florida, who's partnered with us as an equity partner to start taking that into the mass marketing. If you know Kevin Harrington, he's the father of infomercials. So we're going to be pushing these brands from Amazon out into the mass markets and really expanding them. So we're looking for those companies that have products that have not met the mass market yet. And at some point, you'll see them show up, maybe at 4 a.m. when you're up burping your kid or whatever, which is I've had before. Products that show up and you're like, well, how did that get here? And sometimes it's people like us.
Gotcha.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there.
Is there?
like a lot to unpack.
Right.
So just to dial it back a little bit. So you started in the arbitrage space.
Yes, I did.
Just to sort of learn about it. How did that transition, or I guess a better question, did you transition into your own private label brand, or were you working with someone else's established private label brand?
We started with someone else's established private label brand. Once we recognized that it was a little bit of a race to the bottom pricing, and that saturation was a bit of a problem. And of course, we didn't establish the brand. So therefore, we were making somebody else rich or making somebody else more profit. And it's the old adage that if you just work harder, your boss will get a new car. And we're like, yeah, what about us? So then we realized, hey, we need to be doing our own brand development so that we take all the profits, we control the marketing, we control the brand affinity. And it's not a race to the bottom. It's a price increasing brand, so that we started to realize we could charge more for our brands than the established ones that were on there, and we could outmarket them. Because we had that marketing background and knowledge and skill set, we realized that many of the sellers on Amazon who are brands are not taking full advantage of that. And we saw it as a huge opportunity. So we shifted products we knew were profitable and successful. We went out and manufactured our own, created our own private label brands from the products we saw that were being successful, and then went to market against the competitors that we were originally using to go to market with. And we started establishing those faster and faster.
And with that sort of product development, manufacturing, sourcing, I mean, there's a lot that goes into it, of course. Did you have any background in that formerly, or were you working with someone that already had experience?
My business partner had a good experience with that. When we found each other in 2012, he was kind of on a similar trajectory. Had just left a company he co-founded. It was a $100 million underwriting and mortgage business and precious metals business. And he was the VP and co-founder, and that kind of changed positions. And he said, what am I going to do next? And so he decided he wanted to get an e-com, but he had the background, logistics, financial management, and the aptitude to be involved at that level of conversation and manufacturing that he had been in before, and I had not. And so he brought that to the table. And through that adaptation of my skill sets in marketing, lead gen, and the knowledge of the system itself and what the engine was doing to get us to a ranking and marketing position, he brought the logistics and background and negotiations with manufacturing. And so we teamed up. Still with him 8 years later. We're a pretty strong team. Yeah.
That's awesome.
No, that is amazing. And that's the kind of the core pillars, right? Sales, marketing, operations, and finance. Those are, I would say, the 3 core pillars of any company.
It really is. And if you do a SWOT against it, your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, it was very easy for us to see where we fit into that. in our strengths and weaknesses. He very much makes up the detail logistics oriented side of myself that I fail at. I'm more the bigger picture analytical marketing guy who can see kind of the whole thing and where it should go, which is why I'm more the CEO of the business and driving things forward. And he's very much the detailed analytical tactical guy who sees the implementation, operations, and execution components.
I do feel like I should tell you guys from minute 11 to 13 and a half, my internet totally died. I don't know if it showed that I was pending on your side, but I did miss about 2.5 minutes of conversation. I seem to be up again. I just want you to know if I ask a question that was already answered, the internet died.
No worries. No worries.
It is interesting that you brought up even SWOT analysis, because that itself is bringing a level of corporate background that a lot of sellers don't tend to have, or I wouldn't say a lot of sellers don't tend to have. Many that are just starting out might not think to start thinking about.
Yeah.
Sure. How much has it benefited you bringing over these sort of corporate tools and resources and mindsets even to the Amazon space?
Yeah, I mean, to business, what we're talking about is business and business management, and how to become a business person to some degree, and an adaptation to different business models. You can be a business person like I was in the oil and gas industry and had to deal with very different things with supply and logistics versus an e-commerce company, which has a very different front end and back end management structure, diversification of locations. It was very different since most of our stuff was centrally located in Oklahoma. I'm now global. So that brings in a whole different kind of space and time, if you will. My partners are distributed across the world, from Canada to Idaho to Florida, and overseas as well, with our sourcing agents and our manufacturing contacts and even our virtual assistant groups that help us, as well as our clients who are all over the world as well. So that is not something that IBM necessarily or a corporate prepared me for. That was something that mentorship prepared me for, because one of the things I did get involved was in finding a right mentor to help me oversee some of those business issues that I didn't get. So I had some background in the corporate space up obviously until 2007, but quite frankly, none of that helped me become an entrepreneur. The strength, weakness, SWOT thing was kind of initially, how do I work with Reed? Because we're very different people. At the end of the day, he speaks a very different language than I do. And yet here we are 8 years later. Why? Because we've stayed very strong in understanding whose strengths and weaknesses apply to certain locations and when we don't step into each other's lane. And there's an ability in the trust now implicitly to understand what each one's doing to support the entire business goals and objectives, and both being bought into it. Very important. So quite frankly, to get to that level, the mentorship is really what took me there. And that's one of the things I very much focus on now with people that I work with in what we call our business builders, is understanding their aptitude and ability to understand the more complex management structures that have to be deployed to really build an 8-figure business. It sounds really sexy. I want an 8-figure business. Everyone wants a 7-figure business. But if you've never done it, it's the same analogy as I grabbed a hammer and ran out to a job site and wanted to build a house. You could swing at everything that looks like a nail and because you got a hammer, but that doesn't mean you can build a house. It really is going to help if you sit down and work with someone who's actually built a house and tells you where to swing the hammer and how to swing it correctly. Because again, the tool had nothing to do with it. It had to do with the knowledge and application of how to use that tool. And that's how we use technology as an enabler in our business. And understanding that if I do brands and understand brands, and quite frankly, if I understand my customer and I can double my understanding of my customer, then I'll double my revenues and I'll double my profits. But if I go in and think I'm just going to make this business work on mechanics, that isn't going to fly, because pushing buttons doesn't make the money. That's the same way as the hammer doesn't build a house if you don't have the right knowledge to swing it.
It's a really good analogy.
Yeah.
I like that a lot.
Or the knowledge and foresight to use a nail gun instead of a hammer.
Right. Tools appropriate for the right time, right? It comes into experience. Right. You don't shoot yourself in the foot with one. Or the head. I've seen that happen too.
My dad has shot himself through the thumb.
Yeah. Or you just get so frustrated and not making the business work that you want to put it to your own head. That's the problem. Right?
Jeez.
We're getting to
we're getting to that level today.
All right, back up, slow down. Whoa, hold up. Yeah, that's a good point. So there's a lot of people I deal with who are in business already to some level, and there are a lot of people who are in the corporate world who want to kind of escape that. I even have military people who want to get out of the military or have retirement plans who want to build e-com businesses. At the end of the day, it typically allows that opportunity for any kind of person. I've taught 19-year-old high school dropouts and 76-year-old grandmas how to do this business model. what was the difference between them and anybody else in between who wanted to do it? The end was they decided prior to ever meeting me that e-commerce was something they wanted to do. They just became impassioned. They listened to enough YouTube videos. They watched some training. Maybe they took a training and couldn't quite put it all together and they still wanted to work. But they just had an innate drive to do it. And our paths crossed at the right opportunity. And they liked to understand the business and management component of what we teach, mainly because we build with the end in mind. Similar to that house analogy, I'm going to build a home, but if I'm not paying attention to the walls, by the time I get to the roof, the house could be leaning 30 degrees to the left. So you got to understand how to build that foundation very correctly, because these businesses are worth more in the end than at any time during the business building phase. And so it's very important to understand the time, energy, and effort you put into building an e-com company. It has an intrinsic long-term value to someone else. It could be a legacy play for you. It could be a family play. I got 5 families who are teaching their kids how to build these companies together with them side by side. They're in doing the research, the product. They come to our groups. They're a part of it. And it's really cool to watch as they're learning how to build skill sets. In fact, my partner, Reed, his son, Jonah, actually manages companies for us now as a full-time. He started out when he was 16. We raised him up. He went to college. He realized I can be a chef at home and make more money selling the products in the kitchen space than going and being a chef. So he dropped out of school and now has a multi-seven-figure business that he runs in that and taught him how to do it. So it really has to get down to aptitude and an understanding and desire that, you want to build an online business, and e-com and physical products are what you want to do. With that push, you're willing to learn. You're willing to understand.
Wow. What a shift from chef to e-com.
Yeah. Well, he uses the products in his kitchen that he developed in his brand, and uses it for marketing videos and other things. And he can still cook for his family and his kids. He got three beautiful little children. And he can stay at home as a dad and cook and be with his wife and build his e-com business as part of his home. Wow.
And can we unpack the business model that you're talking about? Because like you mentioned, we all see the YouTube videos. If you have ever looked up what it is to be an Amazon seller, I'm sure you were targeted with YouTube ads for, hey, this is how you get started, or this is how you grow your business, without even having a mindset of like, hey, what exactly is the business? It's more than just taking a product, sending it to Amazon, selling it. 10 years ago, maybe a little bit different, a little bit easier. But can we unpack the business model of maybe just private labeling within Amazon?
Yeah, for sure. So Amazon for itself is a big ecosystem, as you all know, and I'm sure you buy stuff on it. Most sellers on Amazon understand the concept. Most buyers understand the concept of literally clicking on your mobile phone. And we call it subscribe and spend in my house because it's doing a lot more than saving. At least the number of packages that show up weekly from Amazon at our house. Typically, you'll see the Amazon demographic of buyers is women 27 plus, which is fascinating to me, but that's kind of where the business model goes. They're typically brand driven in nature. Thus, the idea that they're just cost conscientious is not really true. It's kind of a misnomer. And so if you watch a lot of these training videos and stuff, and you hear people talking about it, a lot of times they talk about the pricing and the structure and competitiveness of that. They might even talk a little negative about the saturation and competition aspect that could be and is a component of Amazon at a certain selling level. But when we sell products, we're typically in the $30, $50 to $300 in range. We're going after a different level of affinity on Amazon. We're typically very profit conscientious, and we want to hit a certain metric of product for every SKU that goes out, or we won't sell it within our brand. And we typically try to look for more of the high-end luxury type of brands that we can become and grow up. Thus, we can raise our prices, increase profitability, and of course, increase our market share over time. One of the ways you can get started doing that is called white label. That is, in essence, pre-manufactured products that have been already created at a manufacturing level. And you can put your logo on them, even put your logo on the box and send that product out. Now, you had no say about how it was manufactured. You simply get the product as it is, and you can sell it and put your logo on it. It's called white label. Private label is just literally the customization. And that sounds really simple, but it's as simple as, okay, a product that is in the market, they have a button that's just a little small and maybe it's a dial turn, but you see the reviews and everybody's like, the dial's too small, or maybe it should be a little softer. It's a little hard for my hands to turn. Well, I can take that product and customize that make a dial that's a little bigger, a little easier. Maybe it's a lighted dial. Maybe it's not even a dial at all. Maybe it's a switch or some other type of mechanism. I've customized that product to the point where I can now register it in Amazon as part of my brand and go as far as doing a product trademark on it that makes it uniquely my intellectual property. And that's one of the second biggest differentiators of private label over white label or arbitrage. You are now the official brand owner. You have the intellectual property and intrinsic value of that product. And you take it back to market and go against your competition, telling the whole world, my buttons are easier to push. They're softer to turn. They're better for hands that have arthritis. And it's a bigger dial button and it glows. And all of a sudden, people are like, that's exactly what I wanted. It's not what was on this other product. And oh, by the way, it may be $10 more, but that's what I wanted. And it's a concept of understanding how that exists in the market then starts to lead you to looking at what we call our white cars. And Amazon's white car slipstream literally has to do with you identifying those products that are already selling because it's not about inventing things. It's about innovation. And if you look at just slight ways to innovate and private label to the point of trademark, now you've created that property. Now you've created a unique identifier, and you now have a brand that you can establish and continue to develop deeper and deeper into that brand, additional product lines for somebody who bought the original product. Well, sell them the widget and gear that go with it. And all of a sudden they're driven, because we all are brand driven at the end of the day. You can each tell me what kind of mic you're using, why you chose the headsets that you chose versus other ones, and why you're on the couch or chair that you're sitting in because you like it because it's softer and makes your bottom feel better or whatever. You have a brand driven to yourself, your clothes, your cars, your iPhone versus Android. You can then create that as a seller. You can create that brand driven affinity with folks. You can get them emotionally involved in it. And of course, you can establish the additional product lines that go deeper into that. And as long as you're making it profitable and you're considering Amazon's fees and your marketing costs and shipping costs and all the logistical things that go into selling a unit of that product, Amazon's a great place to go in and get sellers going, because there is already people who want to buy those products. And one of the biggest things about online is getting eyeballs on the offer, as we call it in marketing, right? And Amazon solves that problem where many people try to go online and get people to buy their wares, their t-shirts, their goods, their products, or whatever. And they simply can't get enough people to see it to actually start purchasing it. And that's what we love about Amazon. As I mentioned, it's a 7-lane highway, and there's people wanting to buy all along every day, 365 days a year, right? 24/7. And it's a great place to prove those products very quickly. So hopefully I answered that question to the degree you wanted me to.
Yeah. No, that's definitely it itself has a lot to unpack. But you mentioned taking a product and innovating on it, and I found that interesting only because we do see, coming from the sourcing side and the supply side, there are sometimes brands that historically they do exactly this. They might just innovate on products, and that comes with a deep background in marketing that specific product, and you're tweaking, one thing to it, making it custom, as opposed to inventing a new product, which requires a different level of marketing because it requires more education.
It requires more education. Very smart. Yes, you said the trigger word, because Amazon is not about education.
Right.
It's all about buying.
And that's, I guess, what advice would you have for someone that was looking to go with more of that custom product that does require, and some of them are amazing ideas. I see them come through. I'm like, I would buy that.
Yeah.
But it's like, what would I look up exactly on Amazon to even get to it? I don't know. What would you advise those brands that are going into those very customized and education heavy products?
I would establish something first outside of Amazon, brand influence, media, etc., or influencers that could bring authority or drive to that particular product and awareness of it. Even crowdfunding those particular products, I've seen very successful. In like an Indiegogo crowdsourcing, going out and actually raising awareness of people, doing the videos are very powerful to demonstrate the products and why it's different than the others. And then getting the crowd to kind of rally behind you. I know a couple of guys who do product launches specifically in the crowdsourcing space. And they're doing it usually with products that are kind of unique. They may not even be found on Amazon yet, or they may have competitors on Amazon that are close, maybe 25%, but 75% is completely unique to this product. And that it takes a little bit harder marketing, as you mentioned. It takes a little bit more education, a little more time. But I've typically seen those in the crowd space and the crowdfunding side do a lot better. And then they're able to go over to Amazon and establish it. Why would you establish it on Amazon at all? Some people would ask, like, why would I just go over here and do all this? Why would I even try to bother with Amazon? Quick analogy, you guys probably know this, but at my age and time in life, when the internet was coming online and it literally into the 90s, if you didn't have at least a brochure website, you weren't a legitimate business, right? You may have heard this or you know about it. Now, if you're an e-com company and you don't have an Amazon representation, you're not only not seen as very serious, but you're also losing that market share and people are buying your products. So for example, you may see something on Facebook and you're like, I don't know if I can trust this company. A lot of times people go over to Amazon to validate if that's a legitimate business, a legitimate brand. If they see it on Amazon, then they'll go ahead and purchase it. If not, they'll buy a competitor's. We've seen our clients, some of the larger ones running over $1 million a month in spend, are seeing up to 18% of their spend in traffic that they wanted to purchase their products in their environment offline, off Amazon, if you will, go over to Amazon and buy somebody else's product. So we call it found money for those types of companies who have not established a brand stronghold on Amazon. Even if it's not a primary channel of their sales, it does establish a sales channel where money can literally be found that is spilling over from online activities over to Amazon. Where people want to get that product or find out that it's a valid company that's actually selling this product legitimately.
I think you're muted, Lisa.
I totally was. That's interesting. Because I didn't think about, because I definitely still, from the consumer's perspective, if I find a product in like a, if I'm served an ad for something, I will go to check and see if they have a legitimate website. But if I'm just on Amazon and I see a product, I don't question it. I just buy it.
It's trust. It's absolutely trust. We call it similarity plus familiarity equals trust. So if I'm going to create a brand established, brand new, no one's ever heard of on Amazon, I'm going to look for the 3 to 5 competitors that I've never heard of either. And I'm going to look and say, can I become the 4th, 5th, or 6th? Can I become top tier in the brands that no one's ever heard of category for these products? And you think, well, no one's ever going to buy that. Well, I can argue differently. They'll buy thousands of those every month on Amazon, right? From products and brands they've never established. Why? Because ultimately they trust Amazon first and they trust the brand second. And believe it or not, even in today's age, many people do not know when they hit the buy button on the buy box who they're actually buying from. And as it stands currently, about 70% of all sellers on Amazon are third-party sellers like us. So out of 10 packages you've ordered, 7 of them probably came from people just like me. And you didn't even realize it. It shows up in an Amazon box, you buy the product, and you didn't really care where it came from. And in many instances, you think it's Amazon. But in many cases, it's actually not. And you can go back and look at the products you've got from the last 90 days that you bought yourself and just look. If there's 100 of them, there's a good chance 70 of them were bought by people like us.
Oh, yeah. I was none the wiser to that until I started working at Noviland and we started talking to leaders in supply chain and e-commerce. And I was like, I'm not buying everything from Amazon. What are you talking about?
You're not. And that's where I kind of found it to be funny because people like to, get after the big corporatocracy, the little bit of like, hey, these guys are bad, the big evil corporation, maybe we shouldn't mess with them. There's a little bit of that feeling, right? I get it. But don't forget, they're also enabling 70% of their customer base to be us, small businesses, mom and pops, those who actually saw a big uptick in last year, in 2020. Like e-com was one of the biggest, fastest growing industries last year, right? And in the first 3 months, first quarter, Forrester and Bank of America published a paper, you can go look it up. There was 10 years of e-com growth in that first 3 months, 10 years. It was huge, right? Amazon fourth quarter, December through December 2020 was their largest quarter to date. They went into hyper growth, 60% growth, right? So in terms of adoption rate, if we look at a bell curve of adoption rate, right, we've had a long run up through e-com through the 90s and the dot-com bubble, which kind of plateaued a little. Then we saw it re-merge with social media and the power of social media and brand influencing in the buyer space, especially online. And what we didn't yet see was major shifts in the market or adoption that would have forced people who currently weren't using Amazon online or any kind of purchasing through their mobile apps or devices to shift to that out of need and necessity. And 2020 changed that. It really hit that adoption curve. And so many millions of people started to utilize device. My parents started to use online ordering when they were very resistant to it previously.
Mine too.
And now they're doing it. That's just a normal part of what they do, right? And that's a big shift in the adoption curve. What does that mean? If you predict forward, if I just do it from my own seat, or I look at where the analytics and Forrester researchers and these people are going, by 2030, they're estimating $21 trillion in offline spending will end up online. So there's a big shift coming, and we're just at the cusp of riding that real adoption wave. So as we move into this, what we're doing, we're kind of hedging against that about what the next 3 to 6 years are going to look like in terms of adoption for e-com. It's going to be huge, even more so.
Interesting. Because I was going to ask, if looking to the immediate future, if you thought that there was going to be maybe a drop off in e-com, since everybody is so recognizing that the rest of the world is in a very situation than the US. But here in the US, the majority of Americans are now fully vaccinated, and everybody's really looking forward to, being outside, getting back to their community and really being able to support those smaller businesses they couldn't see beforehand. And some of them, shifted to the e-com business model, and that's how they were able to survive, or they used DoorDash to get from the local restaurants. But I was going to ask if you thought that maybe, with folks so eager to get out there and make a connection in person with folks, if there was going to potentially be a drop, at least in the US.
Well, I'll tell you what I know specifically, and that is in our businesses, we saw a 30 to 40% increase last year. What we've seen is about a 12 to 15% decrease this year. But if you do the math, we're still up. You're still up, right? So while it looks weird to see the numbers in the PL go down as of June this year, what isn't weird is the huge boost we got last year that still normalizes it as an increase this year. So all in all, we're going to see an increase this year, not as large as last year, but definitely larger than 2019. So we've seen that kind of go down. We're seeing it kind of pick back up. There's like, hey, we're free, let's go out. But then it's, oh, by the way, we still need something, so I got to order it online. And there's varying shifting degrees of who's available to go out, where the mask mandates are, what businesses are locking, what state it is. It's very diversified right now across our country as to who can go where. We're in Florida versus California. It's just different right now. So there's different levels of adoption that are occurring. But one thing is for sure, people quickly understood the convenience and power of having something show up on your door if you never fully recognized it before. That was definitely a huge awareness in that market. And so we see that actually continuing to trend up, and we still see good organic growth comparatively. And we call it the COVID bump now because it really was a bump last year, no doubt.
Yeah.
And those increases, it's important to also note that they are compounding margins.
Yes.
So 10% of what you made last year, if it's still, let's say, a 17% bump of what you had an already 30% bump of last year, that's significant. That continues to compound, it's where you also have obviously a larger margin. You can continue expanding. We're starting to see new investments in infrastructure here in the US, or at least an infrastructure plan. Who knows? Maybe we'll get Amazon packages delivered within the hour the next few years.
Fascinating, right? What could possibly come of all that?
Yeah. But how? Because this is you mentioned that we've seen 10 years worth of growth in the past year. Did I get that right?
3 months, actually.
In
the
3
past
months, the
quarter
first quarter
of 2020 saw 10 years of growth. If you look at the charts, it just kind of went bloop, vertical, like incredible, right?
Yeah, and that's amazing. But how? And that gave opportunity to a lot of, as we also said, small businesses, and with 70% of them being on Amazon. How can companies, as they scale up, scale their infrastructure and their organization and their business model even up with all this rising e-commerce trend?
Well, it's going to be different per type of model. If you are using a third-party logistics company or a pack and pick shipper with 3PL, as we refer to it, then you're going to be met with whatever warehousing time and manpower issues they might have to scale on that side. If you're doing drop shipping, or you're shipping all your own products, from that, or your own warehouses. The beauty of why we rode with Amazon and have stayed with them this long is they have a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure behind them. The supply chain, the logistics, the warehousing, et cetera. And while we still maintain coast-to-coast 3PLs within our business for risk, overflow, and inventory management, many of the companies did not take that seriously. So many of the companies in Amazon, there's about 2.7 million sellers on Amazon that are considered to be, companies, small mom and pop individual company, people, businesses, if you will. And they did not plan correctly for some of the growth. And so many of them ran in inventory. And so they're learning very quickly how fast logistics can become a nightmare in your business. Shipping times have expanded a little bit. Commodity-based types of products are a little harder to come by right now. We got a little more money than products, which is kind of hedging a little against inflation, but that's also not bad if you have the products, because the prices can be raised a little bit, which is part of the control mechanism of a physical product business. So we look at Amazon's infrastructure and we realize, so much of it can be delivered just in time for us, which is what we love about it. So we get them our products, and through their Fulfilled by Amazon or FBA system, they deliver the products for us. So as long as we keep it fed, they continue to move forward with us. And that's where the difference between understanding the business as a management and an actual structure of business for your supply chain, logistics, and risk management stands. Many people treated it like a side hustle or a side business, and we're not serious about how to actually set out and plan for growth. And many of them got shut down because of that. And many of them are trying to come back this year to try to adapt to that now that they've understood that very hard understanding. For myself and my clients, they were all very aware of it. Prior to any of that happening, we were like, this is what you do, this is what you do, this is what you do. And so we hammered it into them, and they all survived through that and have now taken over new positions in the marketplace that were previously gapped because the other sellers fell out. So it's created a tremendous amount of opportunity in Amazon right now. Most people don't recognize how big of an opportunity it is. Let me give you one quick example. Amazon is got, obviously Bezos is moving. He's going to fly off to wherever he's going to go outside the world. I don't know where he's going, but okay, that's cool. And, he's moved out. A new CEO is coming in. Internal components of the business has changed as well. They're definitely focused a lot more on compliance heavy in terms of what you can and can't do in the system. And y'all know about Amazon reviews, the pros and the cons, how it helps you if you get great reviews, and how it can be really bad if you can't trust the reviews, or people use the reviews as a weapon against you in competition. They literally just killed off $1 billion in sales across 12 different sellers who were found to be using buyer networks, review networks, and black hat non-TOS compliant tactics to rank. And predominantly they were in the electronics category, which is a very high profile, high business. I have a seller I know who's doing 6,000 units a day as an example. So there's a lot of business, a lot of fight for that. Anchor, which is the largest now seller of electronics who didn't get kicked off, is also an original brand that started on Amazon and the first to go IPO. So in the process of all of this, they have now taken over a good portion of electronics market share because $1 billion of their competitors' dollars just disappeared from Amazon due to compliance and issues. So there's all these little movements and opportunities that we're seeing that we're trying to take advantage of as fast as we can throw capital at it. For anybody paying attention who thinks that it's maybe competition, hyper competition, saturated, there's no opportunity. If you go to YouTube, you might feel like that at sometimes listening to a lot of people talk about it. Stay away from it. They steal your products. They'll take your products. There's too much competition. It's a race to the bottom, all the negativity stuff. We frankly don't play by that at all because of where we play in the market. Many times people are feeling those effects because of what we're doing with our brands. Not that we're hurting anybody or that we're intentionally going after people with negative reviews. We are very TOS compliant. We've never had an account shut down, nor are we going to be under threat because we've always been business ready, TOS compliant. But many of those others are not. And it's creating these big gaps and holes and obviously opportunities for us to fill in. And when we raise our prices and we're doing great business, Amazon is rewarding us above the other brands, and they're not able to keep up with us. They're lowering their prices. They're playing the games. They're doing negative stuff. And it's backfiring on them. Right. And the more they continue to do that, it's going to backfire.
I mean, the TOS, though, the terms of service, they almost seem a little like there's a lot of gray area in there. There's a lot of wiggle room.
Until this year, there has been. And many of those companies I mentioned, along with about 200,000 other accounts that were exposed in that, played in that gray area. They weren't full black hat like a few of those were, and they weren't 100% white hat, but they were in that little gray area in the middle playing around where Amazon didn't quite enforce it in terms of compliance. But you got to remember, this is a giant ecosystem, right? With hundreds of millions of records managed by artificial intelligence bots and engines that run around and do compliance checks to determine if you're in or out. And sometimes they're positive and sometimes they're negative. We can have things shut down by Amazon's, system and have to go in and have a manual person overwrite it because it just saw something the AI didn't like. And so it stopped the selling of our listing or it changed something. And we got to deal with that too. That's just part of playing the game. But they have enabled some of their systems to go out in full compliance. And that is where some of these artificial intelligence bots, literally, that are running around inside of Amazon's system, are starting to just remove those sellers because they are now more following their terms of service. Let's put it like that. And there's quite a few people falling out of the terms of service because the data is all there. Amazon's had it all along. They're just now deciding to act on it. And it's new management coming in a little heavy-handed, wanting to shake it up a bit.
Yeah.
Well, it's all about patterns, right? And that's even what you were talking about earlier with the A9 algorithm, and just sort of seeing what those patterns were and what you can use to your advantage.
Absolutely.
And us as humans, we have patterns. We don't tend to have, let's say 15% of all of our products that are being sold be reviewed. Right. It's just not natural. But I know you've focused also a lot on brand. And this is a key differentiator, I think, that has been talked about more in the past few years. And I'm happy about it because otherwise it's more of just a commodity sales, race to the bottom sort of thing. A side hustle. How do, let's say someone that did start it as a side hustle and is, making significant, let's say top line rev, how do they start to build out the brand itself? Because I think a lot of sellers are in that space where they just grew out of nowhere, and now they have to manage this more like a business because it is, they're considering leaving their job, or they just can't manage it themselves.
Right.
How do they make that transition, or how would you recommend they make it?
I have 5 of those guys working right alongside of us right now inside my business builder. So let me tell you what we're doing for them and why they showed up to do what they're doing. They've been working between 3 and 5 years at the wholesale brand level, where they're not branding their own products and developing it. They're doing more of the arbitrage, retail arbitrage, online arbitrage, wholesale arbitrage methodologies. And that is, again, building someone else's brand. At the end of that, as an investor in these companies, as well as a broker for investor groups, no one wants to buy a job. And each of those businesses is just another job. And so they sway away from any of those. So they don't have any legacy player value. Either they need to be handed off to a family member, or when time comes, they're going to get shut down. Because again, no one wants to spend 100 hours a week working these businesses. And this is one of the problems that these people came to us with. It's finding the right products to continue to sell at higher margins and not be undercut at the race to the bottom. And it's also the logistics component and management structure that has to occur in order for those models to actually work. There's a lot of back end movement of products. And if I can't sell it on Amazon, what happens to it then? I got to offload it to eBay or some other component to deal with it, which becomes a logistic challenge. I may have employees at a warehouse. I have a warehouse to do that kind of stuff. And at the end of the day, all of that creates complexity in a model that's actually more simple. So if we use the FBA model and we use a brand-driven business affinity, then I don't have to have all that problem. I have 3PLs. They deal with the warehouse and the employees. I don't. I have Amazon's infrastructure to deliver and even help with customer support. So I can have a single person managing 2 to 3 of my accounts, right? And they're a virtual contracted assistant based on performance and their KPIs for performance. It's a very different structure and complexity to that. We used to have a 20,000 square foot warehouse. We moved 10 trucks a week, and I had 12 employees with healthcare and the whole 9 yards. Shut the whole thing down. Shut it all down. Realized that was a big foray into a hole that we shouldn't be going into. The profit margins were around 7% triple net, and as opposed to the 20 to 30% triple net we see on FBA brands. So what they're doing is they're looking at the data they have inside of their business that they've been selling, the products they've been moving, and then they're looking at it with fresh eyes now. They're looking at it to say, why couldn't I sell that product as opposed to selling somebody else's brand? So what they're doing is they're going through an iterative process. We're teaching them to learn to look at their white cars that are sitting right in front of them and determine how many more of the ones they can actually see that meet the seller criteria to be turned into private label brands, where they would go back and compete with those companies. And many of them realize very quickly they can. And so now they're starting to turn that engine on. They're building private label brands, and many of the products that they're going to go to market in competition were products they used to wholesale arbitrage against. And so they're taking that and building up that revenue stream to diversify into private label. So again, they have all this data. They got all these products they sold. They're just looking at the ones that were selling the best at the highest profit margins. They're doing their analysis for private label. We take them through, and then they're determining which ones to launch in a private label brand of their own.
And what sort of data are they looking at to make them think that they could even compete with these larger brands?
So there's competition. Of course, we all understand competition, the word. We understand saturation, the word. We may even understand what we think is hyper competition and even hyper saturation. But until you do some market research, do you actually understand what that looks like? And at the macro view, yes, anybody who's selling a bike seat on Amazon is your competition. Is it saturated? Is it competitive? Is it hyper competitive, hyper saturated? How do you determine? Well, there's certain data points we look at in the numbers, because again, here's where you take the emotional component of Amazon selling or e-commerce or business off the table, and you get down to by the numbers. If it works by the numbers and it's down at the numerical level and it makes sense and you can pencil it in, then it will work. There's an audience for it. It's already been pre-established as selling. And it makes sense to look at the data first and get the emotion-driven aspect out of it. I will sell fuzzy bunny slippers to grandma because she's passionate about fuzzy bunny slippers. She may like the pink ones with the little thing on it more. Okay, great. She's passionate. I'll sell it to her for $49, not $29, because she loves it and must have it, right? Because she's passionate about it. I'm not particularly passionate about it, but if she is, that makes me happy. I'm passionate about the business. It's all in the numbers. So at the end of this, they have to look at certain criteria. They have to maintain so much profit margin. At a very simple pro tip, if you're going to compete with me in this business model, you have to basically understand that if you're selling in the marketplace and your profit is $10 and you're making $10 in unit after all your costs and stuff are sold, I will come in and find a way to make $20, and then I will buy up all your competition. And in about 3 to 6 months, when you look up and you're feeling all the negativity of Amazon flowing down on top of you, it will be because I'm taking all your market share. I'm buying all your customers. I am eating up all your profit. I am taking it all. And what happens is my advertising cost, while being high initially in my bell curve, even as high as 200% average cost per sale, eventually it is going to start to come down. My organic reviews, my organic sales are going to come up and meet it and then supersede it. And my average cost of sales will go down to 100%, 50%, and 30%. Somewhere it will taper off. And I will be making all the profit and the margins. And I will be sitting there for weeks and months to come until someone else can come in and try to figure out how to double my profit. And more often than not, when we identify those niches, they cannot. So our products will stay there for years to come. And then we will dive deep into that because we know the market, the segment, and what is successful. We will simply iteratively continue to launch new products into that brand and straight into that customer segment. And they will continue to buy additional products from us. So every second and third product we can track down from every first level purchase of our average cost of sale, knowing we're getting 100% profit on the second and third. And that is what we call CLTV, customer lifetime value. So we can actually track that down to the second and third sale in the data. And once we have that, we know we can go in and just absolutely own it and stay there for a long time. So you have to understand the market. And here's again, no pro tip. There's only 3 to 5 sellers in Amazon for your particular SKU that you actually have to compete against. I know it sounds weird and counterintuitive to the millions of sellers and the millions of products, like 600 million products. But at the end of it, if I identify who they are, I track them correctly, and I go against their value statement and I market against their proposition, my bigger button that's squishier versus their little one that everybody doesn't like, I will own that. I will own it. And I will have that space for a long time.
Wow.
Yeah.
That was a lot. Wow.
Well, how do they, because also going from this wholesale model, it's still to private label, you managed to do it by finding a successful partner. And I know you mentioned mentorship was a big part of that. But how do they set up their supply chains properly? In order to compete, in order to make that bigger button to begin with?
Well, the people that work with us have an unfair advantage. I don't know how to say it any differently because I have sourcing agents all over the world, supply chain, and an infrastructure that's already built up. When people mentor with us, they get access to all of that. So they get kind of an unfair advantage because we created an incubator. So if they want to go to market with existing brands from offsite to Amazon, or they want to develop a new brand with us and go to market, we have built in all of the components, the pieces. We even own the technology called Sixleaf, that is the data mining tool of Phoenix and the backend launch processes and the system and application that we started in 2014, where we've launched 60,000 of these FBA products underneath that brand. So we have all the data and we kind of have an unfair advantage. So we mentor them in the business and the structure, and they use our sourcing, supply chain, manufacturing, graphics agents, our accounting team. All of it is provided to them and kind of, I think, an unfair advantage to go against the competition in the marketplace. If you try to go establish that yourself, you're looking at least another 3 years, probably $500,000. It's something that we do in a year in less than $100,000. So we are able to send people straight into the answers for each of those because we literally just give it to them.
Wow.
And do you go into more of like an equity partnership with them also?
No, keep it small. And
Okay.
they are CEOs of their businesses, where our real value proposition, you ready for this? My big evil capitalistic agenda. I go finger up and do the muhaha. Is that their businesses are worth more in the end. So we have a non-contractual agreement with them that basically says when that business matures, we have first rights of refusal to either buy it in our investment group or to have it brokered through us. And those are worth millions of dollars. So we build these CEOs to exit these businesses. And then we created a business model that shows them exactly how to repeat that process as much as they want.
Wow. That is impressive.
Yeah, it's a different level of maturity. I mean, it's when you look at startups traditionally, and I was talking to Chris Schifferling of Global Wired Advisors last week about this, but when you start to look into the level of maturity of understanding the finances behind it, it's a whole new ball game.
It is,
right? It's no longer just taking a product, developing it, selling it. But it's finding people like you and others like you and advisors to bring that to scale, to have the resources behind them to actually scale that up. It's, one comparison that I just thought of is like Y Combinator. If someone thinks about Y Combinator, they can go to them. They're quite literally an incubator that just invests a certain amount. That it's a little bit different than yours, but they invest a certain amount. I think it's like $100,000 for 10% or something like that. It's
correct.
It's for really starting up. But they're able to launch within just a few months, as opposed to those 3 or 4 or 5 years even that it might take you to realize, like, hey, these are the tools that I need. These are the people that I need to know. These are the resources that I need to have and the right tools. Going back to using a nail gun instead of a hammer.
Right.
Knowing to do that.
Yeah. And we're not investing in those companies per se. As much as we are investing time, infrastructure, and materials that if I were to make them go do it on their own, or they were to go do it on their own as a part of that, would be very expensive. We've already built the burden of our own supply chain infrastructure, knowledge, and learning curve. We've already spent the multi-millions of dollars putting all this in place, and giving them access to that instead of charging them for it is a huge upside to getting them to success, right? We don't want to unfairly burden them. We ask, typically the people we're working with, I know it's a classic phrase in marketing, but they have more money than time. And they're typically diversifying that through either businesses they're doing while they want to start this revenue up and make it the 7th of their 8th revenue stream. They want the opportunity to learn how to do it at the CEO position, back their own team, existing or new team, into managing this model and more passive, or they hire our team to do it 100% for them, knowing that they will have full hands off when the time comes. To manage this from end to end and grow this structure up, so it will go to acquisition. Because remember, at a acquisition position, one of the things I never want to do is buy a company that's a job, as I've mentioned. And I don't want the management structure to become a job in the transition process. And I want them to be strong in their management, their standard operating procedures, their SOPs, if you will, and how they actually built that company to that level. I don't want to look into the side of this and have a nice big facade on it, open the door, and it looks like, everything was thrown everywhere inside the house. I want to see things put in order. And we help them get their house in order so that it makes it very easy to sell when it goes to market. The opposite is traditional. Traditional is you get the house in order as you're selling it, and then you put it out to market, and then whoever buys it makes you get the house in order. And maybe takes 2 to 3 years for you to do that in an owner equity financing position where they don't give you 100% of the company. They make you stick around for 9, 12, 3 years, whatever it is, to finish the transition of that business so that there's no issue with it turning over, right? We skip that. That's more traditional. I mean, we're like a little bit more like the Airbnb of the world. We're going a different direction. We are going to remove the owner. We're going to remove those processes. We're going to structure it all very clean, and then we're going to put it in the market. That makes it very easy to move those businesses, and we typically move them at 100% of their purchase value. So we exit the owner right out of the door and move them out.
Wow. Well, gentlemen, we're at the top of the hour. I can't believe it. That went so fast.
That was fast.
Yeah.
That was quick.
Really quick.
So Neil, for anybody who wants to get in on the Unfair Advantage, where can they find more information, ask you questions, get a hold of you, things like that?
Sure. You can take the keyword linked up leaders. That'll help this stick with our podcast, and just go to voltagedm.com. That's voltagedm.com. You can Google my name if you want. It's short. It's simple. You won't miss it. It's not TWA is not some sort of acronym. It's not a PhD or accolade. Sorry about that, guys. Not that cool. I actually dropped out of college in my third year. So I'm 30 hours shy of a business management degree, which really didn't apply. I went back at IBM. It was free. And they said, go back and try it. I spent a semester. It's a funny thing. I spent a semester getting back 400 level. I had to write the papers, at the final level to finish my graduate. And I was on a project at that point. It was about $25 million project. And we had about 400 people on it. It was running a very large business. And it sounds weird, but he wanted me to write the textbook responses. And I was writing it to the applied business I was doing that day for IBM. And we got into a little bit of a thing. And he's like, you either write it this way or I'm going to flunk you. And I said, I can't do that. I'm going to quit. So that was the end of that. So that was my last foray with education at that level. And so I just went off and did it. And more applied knowledge than intrinsic is more important, I think, than theoretical. And so now I realize that that's a big component of my success, is that I was willing to go out and just, hard knocks. Learn it, break it, fix it, and do it again. Because
isn't that ironic?
It was interesting for me too. I was in the education system, and there's a lot of value to that, absolutely, for certain tracks and degrees. My wife's an RN, so she couldn't, and she was going to be an MP and go to her medical and get her MD before she decided, I'd rather be with my children. I'd rather stay home. I'd rather do that. And so she chose, I think, a much harder route to do that. But I respect that, and I love what it's done for our family. But you can't be an RN unless you follow the education track. You got certifications and legalities. That's very important to doing that. What I loved, and having a background in music, and in fact went to school on a full ride music scholarship, was that I felt the fluidity and I love jazz, and I felt the fluidity and movement of business as creativity. And it allowed me to define creativity. And now I see that very much in the way business has evolved for me. As I've created this and built this business. And I also see it in the way people get involved in building their brands and having their ability to be creative and kind of define what it is they want to do and how they kind of want to do it. And that's fun. And it's neat to watch that.
Awesome. Very interesting way to put it. Well, Neil, thank you so much for coming on the show with us today. We really appreciate all of the information that you shared. If you guys liked what you heard today, please be sure to like, comment, share with your friends, subscribe to our YouTube channel and to our show on Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts, and turn on those notifications. That way you don't miss any conversations with leaders in supply chain and e-commerce like Neil. Neil, thank you again so much. We really appreciate it. And we will talk to everybody later. Have a great weekend.
Bye, guys.